Commander Vex Thornbeak stood at the podium like he owned the entire galaxy, which, according to him, he pretty much did. 7 feet of feathered arrogance, wrapped in ceremonial armor, that probably cost more than most planets' annual defense budgets. His golden plumage caught the light just right, and you could tell he'd spent at least an hour preening before this little performance. Esteemed delegates of the Galactic Council, Vex announced, his voice carrying that particular brand of smugness that made you want to check your wallet. I stand before you today as a representative of the Kryllian Empire, guardians of peace across 17 star systems. The assembled crowd of alien diplomats hung on his every word like he was revealing the secrets of the universe instead of just patting himself on the back. There were the slug-like Malarians nodding their eye stalks in approval, the crystalline Zephyrite chiming their agreement, and about 30 other species all acting like this was the most fascinating speech they'd ever heard. For 3 centuries. Vex continued, spreading his wings in what was probably supposed to be an inspiring gesture. My people have maintained order where chaos once reigned. Our military prowess is legendary. Our tactical superiority, unquestioned. When conflicts arise, civilizations call upon the Kryllian Empire to restore balance. Captain Maya Rodriguez sat in the back row, looking about as impressed as someone watching paint dry in slow motion. She had that particular brand of exhaustion that came from dealing with way too much nonsense for way too long. Her human features were unremarkable by galactic standards, brown hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, uniform that had seen better decades, and a nasty scar running from her left shoulder down to her elbow that she kept absently touching. While Vex droned on about Kryllian greatness, Maya checked her watch, rolled her eyes, and occasionally made little notes on a tablet that probably contained her grocery list rather than diplomatic observations. Every few minutes, she'd tap that scar with 2 fingers, like it was some kind of nervous tic. Our warriors are bred for excellence, Vex proclaimed, chest puffing out so far he looked like he might tip over. Our weapons forged from the finest materials in the galaxy. Our strategies refined through countless victories against overwhelming odds. Maya snorted. Actually snorted. Out loud, in the middle of the Galactic Council chambers. A few delegates turned to look at her, but she just shrugged and went back to her tablet. Vex's golden eyes narrowed, clearly having heard the sound but not quite sure where it came from. Perhaps, he said, his voice taking on a slightly sharper edge, some of our newer members don't fully appreciate the sacrifices made on their behalf. The Kryllian Empire doesn't seek glory or recognition. We simply do what must be done when it must be done, without hesitation or fear. Maya looked up from her tablet, met his gaze directly, and gave him the kind of smile that didn't reach her eyes. The kind of smile that said she'd heard this exact speech about 50 times before from 50 different blowhards, and she was getting really tired of it. The galaxy is safer because of Kryllian strength, Vex continued, clearly warming to his theme. Our enemies know that to challenge us is to invite swift and decisive defeat. We are the sword that cuts through darkness, the shield that protects the innocent, the flame that burns away corruption, wherever it may hide. More applause from the crowd. Maya tapped her scar again and went back to her tablet. Vex basked in the adulation for another few minutes, throwing in some statistics about successful peacekeeping missions and casualty ratios that sounded impressive if you didn't think about them too hard. He wrapped up with something about eternal vigilance and the burden of leadership that had the Malarians practically weeping with admiration. As he stepped down from the podium, Vex's gaze found Maya again. She was still sitting there, still looking utterly unimpressed, still tapping that scar like she was keeping time to some private joke. Something about her complete indifference bothered him more than outright hostility would have. Vex couldn't let it go. Here he was, fresh off delivering what was arguably his best speech about Kryllian superiority, and this small human was sitting there acting like she'd rather be literally anywhere else. It was insulting. It was disrespectful. It was, frankly, unacceptable. Captain Rodriguez, he called out as the other delegates began filing out for the lunch break. His voice carried that tone of fake politeness that barely concealed genuine irritation. A moment, if you would. Maya looked up from her tablet with the expression of someone who'd just been asked to explain quantum physics to a particularly slow child. What's up, Commander? I couldn't help but notice your enthusiasm during my presentation, Vex said, stepping closer. Up close, the size difference was even more pronounced. He towered over her, all gleaming armor and barely contained ego. I hope I didn't bore you with tales of actual military achievement. Oh no, not at all, Maya replied, her voice absolutely dripping with fake sincerity. I love a good story. Especially the parts where you guys are the heroes of literally everything that's ever happened in the galaxy. Several nearby delegates had stopped to watch this exchange, sensing the kind of drama that made excellent gossip back home. Vex's feathers ruffled slightly, which was apparently the Kryllian equivalent of cracking knuckles. Perhaps, he said, his voice getting that particular edge that preceded really bad decisions. The problem is that humans simply lack the experience to appreciate sophisticated military strategy. Your species is still quite young, after all. Adorable, in your own primitive way, but hardly qualified to judge the methods of your betters. Maya tapped her scar twice, looked Vex up and down like she was measuring him for a coffin, and said, Sure. I mean, no offense, of course, Vex continued, clearly meaning a great deal of offense. Your quaint little ships and basic tactics serve their purpose, I'm sure. But when real military might is required, when the stakes are truly high, well, he spread his wings in a gesture that managed to be both dismissive and condescending. That's when the galaxy calls upon proven warriors. Right, Maya said. Proven warriors. Got it. The crowd was getting bigger now. Word was spreading through the council chambers that the famous Commander Thornbeak was having words with the human representative, and nobody wanted to miss the show. Even the Malarians had stopped leaking excitement slime long enough to pay attention. In fact, Vex said, his voice rising as he played to his audience, perhaps you'd like to see real military excellence in action. The Siege of Kronos simulation is coming up next month. It's a training exercise we use to demonstrate proper siege warfare to less experienced species. Very educational. Maya raised an eyebrow. Siege of Kronos? A week-long military simulation, Vex explained, his smugness reaching levels that should have required environmental protection. Hackers attempt to break a fortress that has never been conquered. The Kryllian Empire has been the defending champion for 30 consecutive years. Not a single species has managed to breach our defenses. Sounds fun, Maya said with the exact same tone she might use to describe a root canal. Oh, but I wouldn't want to subject humans to such an advanced exercise, Vex said quickly. The strategies involved are quite complex. Perhaps there's a basic training program more suitable for your developmental level? Maya tapped her scar again, looked around at the growing crowd of aliens all watching her with expressions ranging from pity to anticipation, and shrugged. Actually, yeah. Sign us up for the siege thing. The silence that followed was the kind you usually hear right before explosions. Vex's golden eyes widened. Several delegates made sounds that probably translated to "oh crap" in their respective languages, and someone in the back started what sounded suspiciously like a betting pool. I what? Vex stammered. The siege. We'll do it. Sounds educational. Maya stood up, tucked her tablet under her arm, and looked Vex straight in the eye. Unless you think it might be too complex for us adorable primitive humans? Vex recovered quickly, his shock transforming into the kind of predatory grin that had probably intimidated countless enemies across the galaxy. Excellent. I look forward to demonstrating the difference between legendary military prowess and enthusiasm. Yeah, me too, Maya said. I'll need to make a few calls, get a team together. Standard rules, I assume? No restrictions on personnel or equipment? Standard rules, Vex confirmed. Though I should warn you, the fortress is considered impregnable for good reason. Many have tried to break our defenses. All have failed. Maya nodded thoughtfully, tapped her scar one more time, and headed for the exit. Well, she said over her shoulder, I guess we'll see about that. As she walked away, the betting odds being shouted behind her were absolutely hilarious. Apparently, the smart money was on complete human annihilation within the first 48 hours. Maya just smiled and kept walking. 3 days later, Maya stood in a cramped briefing room aboard the human transport ship Lucky Strike, watching her hastily assembled team argue about the best way to blow things up. It was, she reflected, Probably not what the Galactic Council had in mind when they talked about diplomatic solutions. I'm telling you, the primary support columns are the key, Tank Williams insisted, though gesturing at the fortress schematics with hands that looked like they could bend steel bars for fun. Tank was built like his nickname suggested, all shoulders and scars and the kind of calm competence that came from years of making things explode in precisely the right way. Take out the structural integrity, and the whole thing comes down like a house of cards. Cards don't usually have automated defense turrets, Ghost Chen pointed out from behind a wall of monitors that made the bridge of most ships look primitive. Ghost was small, quiet, and had the unsettling ability to make any computer system do exactly what she wanted, whether it wanted to cooperate or not. Those defensive systems are hardwired into 17 different backup networks. You can't just blow them up and call it a day. Can too, Rocket Murphy chimed in from where he was somehow hanging upside down from the ceiling, studying the fortress plans from a different angle. Rocket had the kind of pilot instincts that made physics professors cry, and the reflexes of someone who'd spent way too much time dodging things that wanted to kill him. Blow up the right things in the right order, and the whole defensive grid goes offline. Simple. Nothing about this is simple, Maya said. But she was smiling. This was exactly the kind of controlled chaos she'd hoped for when she'd put in those calls. Ghost, what do we know about their communication systems? Standard Kryllian military protocols. Ghost replied, fingers dancing across 3 keyboards simultaneously. Encrypted, redundant, and completely hackable if you know what you're doing. Which I do. Tank, how much of that fortress is actually structural versus show? Tank grinned, the expression making him look like a predatory teddy bear. About 60% is just for intimidation. Pretty walls, fancy towers, lots of gold inlay that serves no tactical purpose whatsoever. Strip away the decorations, and you've got a fairly standard defensive position with some glaring weaknesses. Rocket. Escape routes? 17 that they know about, probably 34 that they don't, Rocket said, somehow spinning in midair while still hanging from the ceiling. Kryllians love their secret passages, but they're not very creative about where they put them. Maya nodded, unconsciously touching her scar as she studied the fortress plans. The Battle of Proxima Station had been different. Smaller scale, fewer resources, and absolutely no room for error. But the principles were the same. Find your enemy's assumptions, figure out what they're not expecting, and then do exactly that. Tell me about Proxima, Ghost said quietly. She'd been with Maya during that particular nightmare, back when they were both a lot younger and significantly more optimistic about the galaxy's capacity for making sense. Maya's fingers traced the scar from shoulder to elbow, a habit she'd developed during the 3 months they'd held the godforsaken station against impossible odds. Proxima was a supply depot. She began settling into the story they all knew but needed to hear again. 17 different alien species attacking in waves, trying to claim the medical supplies we were guarding. We had maybe 200 humans, half of them civilians, and equipment that was held together with duct tape and prayer. And you held, Tank said. He hadn't been there, but he'd read the reports. They all had. We held because we didn't have anywhere else to go, Maya continued. Every time the situation got hopeless, every time someone suggested maybe we should consider surrender or tactical withdrawal, we just didn't. We improvised, we adapted, we made do with what we had, and we absolutely refused to quit. She looked around at her team. These 3 impossible people she'd somehow convinced to take on the Kryllian Empire's pride and joy. The thing about humans is, we're not the strongest or the fastest or the smartest species in the galaxy. But we are, without question, the most stubborn. When everyone else cuts their losses and runs, we dig in and get creative. So what's the plan? Rocket asked, finally dropping down from the ceiling to land in a chair with his typical complete disregard for gravity. Maya tapped her scar one more time, looked at the fortress schematics, and smiled the kind of smile that had probably worried her commanding officers back at Proxima. The plan is to do exactly what they're not expecting us to do. Which is... nothing, Maya said. For the first 2 days, we do absolutely nothing at all. The silence that followed was broken by Tank's laugh, deep and rumbling like distant thunder. Oh, this is going to be fun. Meanwhile, 3 star systems away, Commander Vex Thornbeak was giving his 14th interview of the week to Galactic News Networks. explaining in great detail how the upcoming siege would demonstrate the superiority of traditional military doctrine over human improvisation. He looked very confident on camera. Day one of the Siege of Kronos simulation began with all the pomp and ceremony you'd expect from the Kryllian Empire. Vex stood atop the fortress walls in his finest ceremonial armor, wings spread wide for the benefit of the news cameras, delivering a speech about honor and tradition and the inevitable triumph of superior strategy. Meanwhile, the human team sat in folding chairs about 2 kilometers away from the fortress, apparently having a picnic. "Are they playing cards?" asked Lieutenant Krix, Vex's second-in-command, squinting through binoculars at the bizarre scene below. "It appears so," Vex replied, his voice tight with confusion and growing irritation. The simulation rules clearly stated that attackers had 7 days to breach the fortress defenses. He'd expected an immediate assault, probing attacks to test their readiness, maybe some preliminary bombardment to soften up the walls. He had not expected humans to break out sandwiches in what looked like a portable barbecue grill. "Should we do something?" Krix asked. "Do what?" "They're not violating any rules," Vex muttered. "They're just sitting there." "It's been 6 hours, Commander." "I can see that." Day 2 was more of the same. The humans had apparently set up a full campsite complete with comfortable chairs, a small tent, and what the long-range scanners insisted was some kind of recreational music system. Maya and her team took turns reading books, playing what looked like an ancient human card game, and occasionally wandering around the perimeter of the fortress like tourists admiring the architecture. By evening, Vex's troops were getting restless. They'd been in full combat readiness for 2 days, expecting an attack that never came. The fortress was designed to withstand siege warfare, not to serve as a hotel for increasingly bored soldiers. "Maybe they're planning something for Day 3? Krix suggested hopefully. Day 3 started with Tank Williams doing what appeared to be morning exercises about 50 meters from the fortress's main gate. He was clearly visible to the guards, waving cheerfully whenever they looked in his direction, and generally acting like he was on vacation rather than conducting military operations. That's when the first weird thing happened. At precisely 1,100 hours, the fortress's automated defense turrets began rotating in random directions, tracking targets that didn't exist. The targeting computers seemed to think there were enemy ships everywhere, leading to a frantic 10-minute period where half the defensive systems were firing at clouds while the other half spun in circles looking for threats that weren't there. "Technical malfunction," the chief engineer reported. "We're running diagnostics now." At 1,300 hours, the main communication array started broadcasting what sounded like human music throughout the fortress. Loud, obnoxious human music with incomprehensible lyrics about something called rock and roll. It took 2 hours to shut it down. At 1,500 hours, the supply elevator connecting the lower levels to the main fortress stopped working. Not broken. Exactly, just slow. What used to be a 30-second trip now took 15 minutes. And for some reason it kept playing the same cheerful human tune over and over again. "Sabotage," Vex declared. "It has to be sabotage." "How?" Krix asked. "Our security systems show no unauthorized access. No breaches in the walls, no intruders detected. The humans are still sitting outside playing cards." Vex looked through his binoculars again. Sure enough, there they were, apparently engaged in some sort of strategy game involving colorful cards and increasingly elaborate trash talk. Maya was leaning back in her chair, feet up on a cooler, looking like she didn't have a care in the world. Day 4 brought more problems. The fortress's water recycling systems developed a mysterious tendency to add bubbles to everything, turning simple tasks like drinking or washing into exercises in frustration. The climate control began randomly switching between tropical heat and Arctic cold. And somehow, every single door in the fortress now squeaked loudly whenever it opened, creating a constant chorus of annoying noise that made concentration impossible. "This is psychological warfare," Vex realized, watching his troops jump at shadows and snap at each other over minor irritations. "They're not trying to break in. They're trying to drive us insane." That's when he noticed the care packages. They appeared overnight, small boxes left at strategic locations throughout the fortress. Each one contained what appeared to be local delicacies, exotic foods from various worlds that the Kryllian soldiers had never tasted. The notes attached claimed they were gifts from admirers' expressions of support for the brave defenders. "Don't eat those," Vex ordered. "They could be poisoned." But the food smelled incredible, and his troops were tired of standard military rations. A few soldiers tried small samples. Within an hour, they were sound asleep at their posts, not drugged exactly, just overwhelmingly relaxed and content. Ghost Maya called out from her lawn chair, waving at the fortress walls. "How are our friends doing up there?" "Oh, they're having a wonderful time," Ghost replied, not looking up from her laptop. "I've been very helpful with their technical difficulties." Tank stretched and cracked his knuckles. "Should I start the real fun tomorrow?" Maya tapped her scar thoughtfully, watching Vex pace back and forth on the ramparts like a caged bird. "Yeah, I think they're ready for Phase 2. By day 6, Commander Vex Thornbeak was ready to molt from pure stress. His impregnable fortress had become a malfunctioning nightmare where nothing worked properly. His troops were either unconscious from mysterious care packages or jumping at every shadow. And the humans were still sitting outside playing what appeared to be an increasingly complex card game involving multiple decks and elaborate betting. "Status report," he croaked, his voice hoarse from shouting orders that nobody seemed able to follow properly. "The elevators are now playing something called elevator music, but only in minor key," Lieutenant Crix reported, looking like he hadn't slept in days. "The defensive turrets are tracking seagulls. The communication system keeps broadcasting human poetry. And somehow, all of our emergency rations now taste like something called kale. That's not possible." "I know it's not possible, sir. But here we are." Vex looked out at the human encampment, where Maya Rodriguez was now lying in a hammock that definitely hadn't been there yesterday, reading what looked like a physical book and occasionally laughing at something her teammates said. She looked completely relaxed, like she was on vacation instead of conducting the most unconventional siege in galactic history. "Sir?" Crix ventured. "Maybe we should consider." "Don't," Vex snapped. "Don't even think about suggesting surrender. We're the Kryllian Empire. We don't lose to 4 humans with a barbecue grill and a deck of cards." That's when the lights went out. Not all at once, but in a carefully orchestrated cascade that started at the outer walls and worked its way inward, like someone was flipping switches in a specific pattern designed to maximize psychological impact. Emergency lighting kicked in, casting everything in an eerie red glow that made the fortress feel less like a defensive position and more like the setting for a horror movie. "Backup power?" Vex demanded. "Compromised," came the reply from engineering. "All 17 backup systems are online and functional, but they're only providing about 10% of normal power output. It's like someone rewrote the power distribution protocols to prioritize systems we don't actually need." "Such as?" "Well, sir, the decorative fountain in the main courtyard is running at full capacity. The mood lighting in the officers' lounge is working perfectly. And for some reason, we now have full power to a karaoke machine that I'm fairly certain we don't own." Vex closed his eyes and counted to 10 in 3 different languages. When he opened them again, Maya was standing at the fortress gates, apparently having walked over while he was having his small breakdown. "Commander Thornbeak," she called up to the walls, her voice carrying easily in the sudden quiet. "Mind if we chat?" "How?" Vex shouted back. "How are you doing this? Our security systems show no breaches, no unauthorized access, no physical evidence of sabotage. You've been sitting outside this entire time, playing cards and having picnics." Maya tapped her scar twice, a gesture that was becoming increasingly ominous. "Want to know a story, Commander? I want to know how you're dismantling 30 years of Kryllian military engineering with a team of 4 and no heavy weapons." "The Battle of Proxima Station," Maya said, ignoring his question. "Ever hear of it?" Vex frowned. The name was familiar, something from the intelligence reports about human military actions. Some minor skirmish, wasn't it? Small human outpost, strategic value negligible? 17 different species, Maya continued, her voice carrying clearly in the red-lit darkness. All of them bigger, stronger, and better armed than us. All of them absolutely convinced that humans would do the sensible thing and surrender when the odds became impossible. She paused, looking up at the fortress walls where Vex's troops were listening despite themselves. "We held that station for 3 months. 3 months against overwhelming odds, with equipment that was falling apart and supplies that ran out in the first week. You know why? Superior firepower? Vex suggested weakly. Maya laughed, the sound somehow managing to be both bitter and amused. We didn't have superior firepower. We didn't have superior technology. We didn't have superior numbers or tactics or strategy. What we had was the absolute, stubborn refusal to quit. She tapped her scar again, and this time Vex noticed the way her whole team had gone still, listening to a story they'd clearly heard before but never got tired of. Every time things got hopeless, every time someone suggested maybe we should consider tactical withdrawal or strategic repositioning, we just didn't. We improvised, we adapted, we made do with what we had, and when our equipment failed, we fixed it with spare parts and determination. When our supplies ran out, we found alternatives. When our enemies expected us to break, we got stubborn instead. That's impossible, Vex said, but his voice lacked conviction. You want to know our secret, Commander? Maya asked, looking directly up at him with those tired, determined eyes. We remember who ran. Every single time the situation got desperate, every single time the odds became impossible, every single time things looked hopeless. You and your legendary warriors found reasons to retreat, called it tactical withdrawal, strategic repositioning, reserving forces for future engagements. The fortress was completely silent now except for the sound of that ridiculous fountain still running at full power. But we remember who stayed, Maya continued, and who left. And when push comes to shove, when everything falls apart and there's nowhere left to run, humans are the species that digs in and gets creative instead of looking for the exit. Vex stared down at her, and for the first time in 30 years of military service, he felt like he was looking at something he didn't understand. This wasn't about superior technology or overwhelming force or brilliant strategy. This was about something else entirely. The fortress isn't broken, Commander, Maya said gently. It's just not designed to handle people who refuse to play by the rules you expect them to follow. The official end of the Siege of Kronos simulation came at 0800 hours on day 7, when the fortress's main structural supports finally gave up the ghost and the entire eastern wall collapsed in a spectacular cascade of stone, metal, and very expensive decorative elements. Nobody was hurt, thanks to Ghost's careful manipulation of the evacuation protocols, but the symbolism was unmistakable. 30 years of Kryllian military dominance, ended by 4 humans who'd spent most of the week playing cards and having barbecues. The galactic news networks went absolutely insane. Headlines like Fortress Falls to Human Ingenuity and David and Goliath in Space flooded the information channels, and accompanied by footage of Maya's team calmly packing up their camping equipment, while Vex's forces stumbled out of the collapsing fortress looking like they'd survived a natural disaster. Commander Vex Thornbeak stood in the rubble of his impregnable defense, watching his career prospects crumble along with the ancient stones, when Maya Rodriguez walked up and offered him a cup of coffee. Rough week? She asked with genuine sympathy. Vex looked at the coffee, looked at Maya, looked at the ruins of everything he'd thought he understood about warfare, and started laughing. Not the bitter laugh of defeat, but the kind of surprised, almost hysterical laughter that comes when you realize you've been looking at the world completely wrong for most of your adult life. You never fired a single shot, he said, accepting the coffee gratefully. Not one. In 7 days, you destroyed the most advanced defensive position in the galaxy without firing a single shot. Well, Tank did blow up a few things, Maya admitted. But only the right things at the right time, in the right order. And Ghost did have to get creative with your computer systems. And Rocket may have done some unauthorized reconnaissance of your escape routes. But you're right, we never actually shot at anyone. How? Vex asked, and this time the question wasn't angry or frustrated. It was genuinely curious. Maya tapped her scar thoughtfully, looking out at the ruins of the great fortress. Because shooting at people is what you expected us to do. Traditional siege warfare, frontal assaults, trying to match your strength with our strength. But that's not how humans work. She gestured at her team, who were now helping Kryllian soldiers dig through the rubble, looking for salvageable equipment. We're not the biggest or the strongest or the most advanced species in the galaxy. But we are the most adaptable. When the situation doesn't make sense, we change the situation. When the rules don't work in our favor, we find new rules. When everyone else is looking for a fair fight, we're looking for a smart fight. And when everyone else runs, Vex added quietly, you stay. And when everyone else runs, we stay, Maya confirmed. Because somebody has to. Because running means letting other people deal with the problems we should have solved. Because giving up is easy, and humans have never been particularly interested in easy. They stood there in comfortable silence for a while, drinking coffee and watching the cleanup efforts. Finally, Vex asked the question that had been bothering him since day one. The scar. You keep touching it. What's it from, really? Maya smiled. The first genuinely warm smile Vex had seen from her all week. Proxima Station. Shrapnel from a hull breach on day 47 of the siege. I was trying to repair a communications array when a Zephyrite plasma torpedo took out the wall next to me. That must have been painful. Hurt like hell, Maya agreed. But the array worked after I fixed it, and we held the station for another month and a half. She tapped the scar one more time, a gesture that suddenly seemed less like a nervous habit and more like a reminder. Every time someone thinks humans are weak or primitive or adorable, I touch this scar and remember that we're the species that fixes the communications array while the wall is exploding around us. Vex nodded slowly, finally understanding. It's not a war wound. It's a badge of honor. It's a reminder, Maya corrected, that when things get impossible, humans get stubborn. And stubborn, as it turns out, beats pretty much everything else. The official aftermath of the Siege of Kronos was everything you'd expect from a bureaucratic organization trying to deal with something completely unprecedented. There were investigations, reviews, analyses, and enough paperwork to deforest a small moon. But the conclusion was unavoidable. Humanity had earned its place at the big kids' table. The Galactic Council voted unanimously to offer humans a permanent seat on the Security Committee, with full voting rights and access to the kind of classified information that had previously been reserved for species with proven military capability. Commander Vex Thornbeak, his ego thoroughly deflated but his respect for humanity genuinely earned, requested reassignment to the Human Relations Division. When asked why, he simply said that after 30 years of thinking he understood warfare, he'd like to learn from the species that had just taught him he'd been doing it wrong the entire time. And Captain Maya Rodriguez went back to her quiet life as a diplomatic representative, and secure in the knowledge that sometimes the best way to win a fight is to refuse to fight it the way your opponent expects you to. She still taps her scar sometimes, when she needs to remember who she is and where she comes from. But now, when aliens see her do it, they don't think it's a nervous habit. They think it's a warning.